You're listening to 5 Things with Lisa Birnbach.
Hi, it's Lisa Birnbach, and I finally feel my age when I see young people I've known for a long time become their adult selves, where the choices they've made help codify them, and they become the person they were always meant to be. So it is with one of our guests today, Alexandra Mallick, whom I have known from the time she was a college student, dating the son of very close friends of mine. I always liked her verve and style and sass. At one time, she even worked for me while I had a daily radio show. And now it is clear that after a decade that included working in an art gallery and working in nonprofits and working for Human Rights Watch and owning an art gallery, that Alex has found her mission. It is, and it's a little surprising coming from that universe, to help reform the way justice is meted out in the state of California. It is to help youth who are incarcerated and neglected, and it is to promote restorative justice. She is my guest today, along with the co-executive director of Restore Justice, Adnan Khan. I think you will understand why I wanted to talk to these two powerful young advocates. But first, my top 5. Number 1. Finding parking spots in Manhattan on the weekends in the summer. I don't need to add anything to that. It's a victory. You get it. Number 2, cotton eyelet fabric. Now, cotton eyelet fabric is very lightweight. It has little holes woven in. And eyelet is a word that even the spelling bee at the New York Times recognizes. Even it recognized it before raffia. So why not make it one of my top 5? And it certainly is just, on a sweltering day, it's very comfortable. Number 3, hot dogs. Now, don't scream at me. I know they're bad for you and they have nitrates and filler and all that. But in the summer on a grill, a beef or turkey hot dog is a special treat. I've eaten one already so far this summer, and I'm sure I'll eat another. And with mustard, and even with sauerkraut. I'm one of those people who likes sauerkraut. It's a great pleasure. Number 4, straw hats. It took me years to get over my hat shyness. I never looked good in hats, and I always felt like I was wearing a costume. Oh, look, Lisa thinks she's in a production of Oklahoma. Oh, look, she thinks she's in the Yukon. But now I wear hats a lot, and I wear them in the summer for shade and to keep my skin covered, and I'm starting to like the way they look. Big brim or small, I appreciate the hard work of the summer chapeau. And number 5 is Shannon Watts. She is the founder of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. She's a mom, and before she started this nonprofit, she was taking care of her 5 kids. And she started a Facebook group after the Sandy Hook tragedy, and she has become one of the great advocates against guns and for gun control. And she is heroic. She is also now the author of a book called Fight Like a Mother, and I'm going to try to get her to come and join us on this podcast. Shannon Watts is number 5. So let's welcome Alex and Adnan to the program. I have 2 guests who are so fascinating and also not maybe what you would expect on this show about gratitude, but you would be wrong. You would be so wrong if you didn't get it when this show is over. They are Alexandra Mallick, who is an old friend of mine, and Adnan Khan, who is a brand new friend of mine. Together, they are the executive directors of Restore Justice, a nonprofit based in California that works on prison reform and on restorative justice, which is a system that brings victim and perpetrator together to create some form of peace and reconciliation. Did I say that at all correctly?
Absolutely.
You
did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Great.
You looking for a job in marketing?
Perhaps.
Yes.
We'll see how this podcast does this year. Now, what's so interesting is crime is the most exciting category of podcast, and the world has suddenly become crime crazy. Whether it's S-Town or Serial or my favorite murder, and I mean, Over My Dead Body, Dirty John. I'm doing commercials for all these other podcasts, but there's a hunger for that in people who are, let's say, privileged to not be part of that slice of the world. But yet, no one, whether they're listening to those shows or not, even is aware of the conditions of a prison. They have a TV idea, they have a movie idea, but what the reality of living in a prison is like is nothing like what we've seen. Isn't that right?
I totally agree. And the podcast that you're talking about, I haven't heard any of them. My favorite criminal justice podcast is Ear Hustle. That was started by our friend Earlonne Woods and Nigel Poor inside San Quentin State Prison. But you said it. You said that those are crime podcasts. They specifically talk about the suspense and drama and entertainment around people's crimes, the whodunit, or did they do it, did they not? But they don't talk about the humanizing of incarcerated people and what incarcerated people go through and how they live their lives and how taxpayer dollars are being spent with punitive approaches of prisons. Those things aren't necessarily out there, but they're realities. When
I first met you, you asked a bunch of us, what do you think prison is for? And that was a really interesting way to approach us, because is it punitive? Is it rehabilitative? Is prison intended just to discard people in this country? I mean, we certainly have the highest number of incarcerated individuals of any free world country,
I think if you add up all the people that are incarcerated in the world on Earth, 25% of them are in the United States. And so that's how much we incarcerate people in this country.
And of the 25%, how many of them are people of color?
Oh, wow.
I mean, a majority.
Yeah, a very high majority. Yeah.
Alex, tell us how you became involved in this universe, in this campaign, and how it became, I mean, I know you when you were a college student.
You gave me my first job, actually. I was remembering that.
Yes, you were our assistant on my old radio show, and you were good at it.
It's
you were
still
great
on
at
my
it.
resume.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
Look
Don't
at
ever
you. Now
take
you're
it off.
on the show.
I know.
Wow.
I dreamt about this.
True success story right here. This is so powerful. I'm going to take my headphones off and walk out of this room because this is the story I want to hear.
It's mic drop. You know, my job is done, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just sitting there in the studio just hoping to be interviewed one day, and here I am.
And here you are.
15 years later.
But I would never have thought we'd be talking about prisons.
Absolutely not.
Her full circle is masked in criminal justice reform just to get back on this show.
Well, you know, some people will. But the fact is that your career took lots of different turns, and it did turn. You started working for Human Rights Watch about what? 6 years ago?
About 7 years ago. But before that, I was volunteering at San Quentin State Prison, and I really got involved through a campaign regarding children who were sentenced to life in prison without parole. And what I found out was that the United States is unique in incarcerating children for life in prison, which is a horrific human rights abuse. So that's how I met Adnan. I got to meet people who were sentenced incredibly young, mostly teenagers, and given life sentences, and really thrown away without any hope of coming home. And I mean, that really comes from the narrative that a lot of the media has pushed, especially, you know, all of those podcasts that you mentioned. We talk about violent crime or violence, and we're perfectly okay with someone, you know, the person gets apprehended, gets convicted, and then we don't really care. We're happy they're put away. But what really happens to the person, and especially, you know, you read about so many crimes and what happens, and so many times they're so young. So a lot of times they'll be, you know, 16, 17, 18. So what happens, you know, 15 years later, 20 years later to that person? And that's how I got involved. I got to meet teenagers, people who were teenagers and who are serving life sentences, who are now my age. And that's how I met Adnan.
When you talk about children who are sentenced to life without parole, are you talking about, is there an age group? Does that start at teenage-dom, or is it possible that a child even younger than that would be put away?
Well, children who are even younger than that have been put away. Most commonly, it's as young as 14. Actually, Adnan and I know many people who are given life sentences at 14 years old. I mean, and there are serious crimes. I mean, we can't, say that they aren't serious crimes or that the child hasn't caused a lot of harm, but they are given life sentences. And so, what happens to that child when they grow up? And how do they grow up?
Well, they grow up locked up, right?
Yes. And and then, so what do we do with the child once the child becomes, Adnan always says, and I don't want to steal his catchphrase, but
I didn't know it was a catchphrase.
You say this and it really puts things into perspective. He was an 8-year-old Little League baseball player, and then he became an 18-year-old who was serving a life sentence. So what happened in between? And then also, are we the same person that we were 5 years ago? Most of us aren't. I don't even remember who I was 5 years ago. So if you think about who I was 20 years ago, I just don't remember that.
And how to be responsible or pay the consequences for that person who no longer exists in some way because the brain isn't fully formed.
Until 25. So I did a lot of work around youth and how youth should be treated and how one's brain isn't fully formed until you're 25. So a lot of the crimes that are committed, and actually that's the highest age of when people commit crime, is between the ages of 16 and 25, and then it significantly lowers after the age of 25. How do we hold people accountable when they're that young? And Adnan can really talk about the brain chemistry about that.
But it's also a kid who's committing a crime, let's say a theft, let's say a drug deal, let's say something goes wrong, they get caught. They may have been raised by a single parent. They may have been on welfare. They may have been homeless. They may have had none of the advantages that would protect them from this life. Or their expectations may be very low because the cool people who live near around them are criminals.
Pretty much everything you mentioned there, I could put a check by each one of those things. And none of those things for me are excuses for why I did what I did. But I do want to say that, like Alex mentioned, I went from an 8-year-old Little League baseball player to an 18-year-old with a life sentence. And I think it was Jesse Jackson who said, none of us are born armed and dangerous. And so there is this development of, there's development through neglect or abandonment or some form of trauma. And trauma is generally, when we look at trauma, it's something, an experience that happens, a negative experience that happens, or systems or consecutive experiences that happen that change the way we think, change the way we process information, change the way we process emotion, if we process emotion at all. Most times we don't. And the brain chemistry that Alex was talking about, and I'm probably going to butcher science, but my understanding of it is, why does the brain develop? It takes 25 years for the brain to develop. Okay, what's happening scientifically in the brain? Literally the development of it, the physical development of it. And so what they said is your decision-making part is your prefrontal cortex, which is in the front of your dome, right? And that is where, once you're 25, that decision-making part of your brain is fully developed, where you can weigh out consequences. You can weigh out, you could process information and emotion a lot differently. So when the brain is being developed as teenagers, or when the brain is being developed in general, it develops from the back of your head to the front, which ends with the prefrontal cortex. And what's developed first is the emotional part. And so as you notice, teenagers do things on impulse. You have teenagers, right? You're a mother.
I owned a few.
You owned a few, right?
Yeah.
And so in your time, right? So
yes.
Teenagers do stupid things. I'm one of them at a young age and in groups, and it's all impulsive. Now you couple that or quadruple that with lack of care. Years. I'm talking about maybe a decade. These are only teenagers, and talk about decade of abandonment, neglect, drug abuse, possibly. Tons of trauma. I'm talking about grief, like watching someone get murdered. Sometimes your best friend getting murdered. We have a friend who was incarcerated at 15, was given life 6 weeks prior to him committing a murder. His best friend at the age of 15 died in his arms, was shot and killed in his arms. And he blamed himself. And from that on, the next 6 weeks were like anger. no therapy, no help, couldn't afford it, didn't know it existed for him. And so what could have changed for him if he did receive some type of help? Instead, he ended up hurting someone very bad, like killed someone, and got a life sentence in prison. And then grew up in prison without any type of rehabilitative help, any type of comfort and care. It was punitive. It was, for me, it was a culture of power and abuse and control. That was the most common thing that I experienced in prison.
Do you think that the culture around urban kids, around the poor, around the neglected, can be changed first? Or does it have to? Can you only change it once someone's been incarcerated and it's almost too late? Is there any way that we can take all the youth that have no place to go, that don't go to school regularly, that don't have a caring adult in their lives? Is there a way we can find them and care for them better than we do?
I think that we can. And I know there's probably an age-old, question like, how can we change, marginalized people? There's a lot against it. I believe, and a lot of people believe that it is a form of systemic oppression. It's happening on purpose, and sometimes a kid is not. A child is suffering through grief, but they're doing fine, but they get targeted because of maybe their skin color by police officers or lack of funding or lack of resources. In those communities, which mean emotional intelligence classes or therapy is not provided in public schools generally, especially public schools where kids like that come from marginalized communities can access to. And if there is, it's generally people who cannot relate to their circumstances. The big push that we've been doing nationally, but I can speak for California, is having formerly incarcerated people going back into schools, being used as an untapped resource to go back into the communities and then be the mentors and the quote-unquote psychologists or therapists for these young people that are experiencing these traumas in schools. But right now, that stuff isn't normal. What's normal is, hey, you're a bad kid. If you act up in my classroom, I'm going to kick you out. Where literally your future depends on you being in that class.
And your future really depends on a teacher understanding that maybe you're acting out. Maybe you're not a bad kid. Maybe you've witnessed something bad or been hurt, and you don't know how to express yourself.
Absolutely.
It's a giant question, and it's a giant crisis in this country. Is California leading the way towards a new approach towards it? And I'm asking this question out of pure ignorance. I have no idea what state in this country is better than any other.
I wish I could say that California was leading the way. In Oakland, they used to have a restorative justice program, but then they just lost funding. So, I don't think any place is leading the way. I wish I don't have an answer for that.
It varies. I don't have the numbers for that either. I will say in California that there has been a lot more organizations, community-based people. It is still behind. We still have a death penalty. We still have a huge incarceral system. But there are people, at least, that are now, it's beyond kind of talking about it. People are organizing. People are mobilizing. Whether or not there's actual systemic change happening, maybe incrementally there is. But I think right now where we are, 2018, 2019, it's the most I've ever seen. People mobilizing, organizing, and beyond talking about these issues or trying to get stuff on the ballot or trying to get pieces of legislation accepted by the senators or assembly members, are kind of going into the schools, into the communities and rallying. This has definitely been happening the last year or so, or a few years, I would say.
Years, yeah.
I'm curious about the preponderance of illegal guns and how much that is to blame. I guess it's chicken and egg in a way. If people in these disenfranchised neighborhoods see guns around them, see cool people with guns, know that shootings are kind of a daily occurrence or common occurrence, and are maybe less afraid of guns than they should be? Is that part of what is going on?
That is a very tough question. It could go to the chicken and the egg debate, and go in circles. And And, one side says that, yes, it is these guns. And so now I'm seeing a lot of push towards we need to have background checks. Well, the truth is, like, people that in the neighborhoods or in the hoods don't need background checks to obtain guns. And so it's not about that. But what it is like this culture that's being created of people who have to, in their words, in a lot of our words, like, protect ourselves. This thing I was reading, they talked about how if you have a kid who grew up in a rural area, not even rural, but grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. He's probably a white kid, and where police officers are, from him, looked at as people who can provide safety and comfort for him. So if this kid in the suburbs, someone comes up to him and asks him, "Give me your iPhone," his natural inclination will be to comply, and then go alert authorities.
Right.
But if you take a kid in the very same situation that is from the hood and that grew up in that culture, someone tries to rob him or her of their iPhone, their immediate reaction generally would be to, first of all, defensive, because in the back of their minds, or my mind, is like, police officers are not a place of safety and comfort. Matter of fact, they're the enemy. And so they're not there. I don't have that safety from someone above a quote unquote authority figure to protect me. And so I am on my own. I felt like this. My family has probably felt like this. I was raised into this belief system that I am on my own. And so when that confrontation happens, it is not so much I'm going to go ahead and give you this, as there's going to be a survival part about it. One, because I can't let you take this from me, then I'll be victimized and seen as a person who can be victimized in this community consistently. And two is that I'm on my own and I have to take care of this problem by myself. So you take those very two kids and put them in a classroom, and then circling back to the classroom part, where the kid who grew up in the suburbs steps into the classroom and the teacher says, is starting class, like, "All right, quiet, you guys sit down." The kid will comply because he sees authority as someone that's trusted and safe. He feels safe around that form of authority. That very same kid comes in the classroom and the teacher's like, "All right, everyone sit down." And the kid doesn't sit down and they say, "Hey, you sit down." It will be more of a combat. It'll be combative. So same concept about going back to the gun part. I think I want to say that when guns, it's not so much about the gun in the neighborhood. It is the idea behind I'm on my own, and protection does not come from officers. Protection comes from these guns that either can protect me or make me feel powerful. And so a lot of times that is translated into this object, which is the gun.
That is so well put. I so understand that, the way you describe it. The cop, the teacher, the principal, all these authority figures are people that you are sort of, if not taught explicitly, somehow made to learn these are people who are not going to protect you.
Right. I mean, they're personifications.
They're hostile.
Or they're personifications or projections of a system.
Wow. So interesting. So interesting. Do you mind going back and telling the sort of bare bones of your story?
Sure. How far?
Well,
the crime itself.
What I'm actually the 8-year-old little leaguer. I mean, that's a really poignant way to look at little Adnan. Having a pretty conventional, nice childhood, and then what happened?
So I think for me, it's which is also very, very common. It's a classic case of developmental trauma, and so for me, it was consistent experiences of abandonment, neglect, feeling uncared for, feeling unloved by my primary caregivers. So 8 years old, yes, I was a Little League baseball player. But that 8 years old is very significant for me, too, because that's when my parents divorced. My dad was already an absent father. I always like to say that during my incarceration, I reflected on what my life would have been if my father was all the way in my life, or what my life would have been if he was completely out. Instead, he was in and out, and that for me created more of a tease.
Instability.
Instability, and to almost a point where that instability of love and belonging and being cared for, it was at a very intense and I was much more sensitive. I became much more sensitive to it because of the tease of here's a little, I'm going to take some away. Here's a little more, I'm going to take more away. And that really, I think, started to develop into the necessity of looking for that need at 12 years old, my mom remarried, and my stepfather ended up becoming very manipulative, abusive. He would threaten to kill me. He paid my best friend, that was my best friend since third grade, $10 to try to beat me up. And my mom wouldn't believe me, and so she took me out of sports. The one thing that, as a punishment, because another thing that he would do is take his sons, have his sons, my stepbrothers at that time, take money or jewelry or credit cards from my mom and put it in my jacket or coat pocket
to frame you.
To frame me. And I remember the first time that happened, first time I was accused of stealing from my own mother was from my mom. She called me from work, and which was very rare. If my mom called me from work, that was something serious or important. And she's yelling at me on the phone like, "Why did you steal it? They found this in your jacket." And I told her, "Mom, I'm not doing it." I was crying on the phone, but she didn't believe me. And so at that time, I already knew as a 12-year-old exactly what was going on. Okay, here's this stepfather who's, okay, this guy's no good. And again, I wanted love and affection from him because my actual father wasn't providing it. And once I saw that and then saw my mother take his back and then take me out of baseball, the one thing that gave me, a positive male role model, and then peers that were very similar in doing positive things as 12-year-old kids. And so when she took me out of that, that really, really made me not trust adults at the age
including her, I imagine. At
the age of 12. And so, I mean, I still remember when my baseball coach came to the house. He rang the doorbell. My mom opened the door and he says, "Hey, why is he quitting?" Because I was actually pretty good. And so he's like, "Why is he quitting? Why is he quitting?" And I remember crying, standing behind my mom, kind of hiding behind her leg. And she's like, "No, yeah, he doesn't want to play." And he said, ask him. Pointing at me like, does he want to play? Does he want to play? And I remember crying, and I peeked around her leg, and then when he asked me, "Do you want to play?" I looked at her and I said no, like, I don't want to play. And even though everything in my body was telling me I do, and psychologically I probably subconsciously understood that was something that I needed. But anyways, I stopped. Those events really made me stop trusting adults, like you said, even my mother. And so this need for belonging, like I didn't, and then my mother would tell my uncles, aunts, and grandparents who lived nearby that I was also stealing, that I was untrustworthy. So when I was at their home, they would look at locked doors, look at me with suspicious eyes. So at 12, 13 years old, like, it just didn't feel, no place felt like home. When my dad did appear, it didn't feel like home. He was drunk and alcoholic and a bad gambler. At my stepdad's, my mom's house didn't. My grandparents' uncle, aunt's house, it didn't. And so I naturally gravitated towards like the park. And mind you, I'm still a good kid. I was good in school. I learned. I was A's were easy to come by. But the everything I was experiencing. I mean, a 12-year-old that's depressed, 13-year-old that's depressed. I found comfort and sustainability of care in other kids that were like me. So when the quote-unquote good kids would go home once the street lights turned off at the park while we were playing basketball, a couple of us would stay back. And again, I still felt like I was a good kid, had good morals, good values, but I started smoking weed when I was like 15, started drinking alcohol a little bit when I was 15, 16, started running away from home, cutting school, and those things just developed. Fast forward, by age 17, haven't seen my father since I was probably like 14. Now he's completely out of my life. My mom remarried and divorced him, remarried and moved out of state, left me to the care of my uncle, aunts, and grandparents, and a month later I was kicked out of the house. And so living homeless was very tough physically. At 17, like, didn't know where I would stay. I slept in cars, parks, friends' houses, couches, like anywhere I can. So like a physical structure was something I definitely needed, and it was difficult. But what was more difficult was that my whole childhood, since 8 years old, all my ideas and subconscious beliefs about not feeling loved, feeling uncared for consistently, abandonment, neglect, hurt, pain, shame, those things were reinforced as a person who literally is kicked out of the family. Like, this is official, we don't like you. Like, that was validation to me at that time, like, oh, this is for real. Maybe I was, guessing this the whole time, but this is for real. And
I really am unlovable.
Oh, absolutely. I really am unlovable. And so, like, for me to be part of a group of friends meant everything. Loyalty, trust, which was not provided at home, became everything to me. And so, like I like to say, like the reason I committed my crime at the age of 18 is a decision that I made consciously. Yes, I was 18. You can talk about the brain development, whatever, but I definitely want to take full responsibility for that decision. However, I will say that everything that led me up to that point made that decision easier to make.
Right.
Right. So I'm not blaming homelessness. I'm not blaming
Right.
neglect, because not everyone who faces those things commit crimes.
Right.
But I will say in my situation, everything just added up in that moment.
So take us to that night.
Yeah. So to that night, here I am. About a month prior, I run into a guy while I was kind of homeless, sleeping in this broken car. I was 18 by now. I turned 18 homeless, and he was 22, and he realized that I wasn't living anywhere, and he said, "Hey man, my sister got married, and I live with my parents. We have an extra room. Just come live with me." And that just meant a lot to me. I felt like I owed him everything. He was older, so I saw him as his older role model. And what we would do, we would smoke weed together, and but live at his house with his parents, who were very hospitable, actually. So I finally felt like someone, and a stranger, like cared for me and loved me, and like cared for me so much to bring me into your home, which is a complete opposite of where my primary caregivers kicked me out. And so that just meant everything to me, and so I would do anything for him. So one night, we're at his friend's house. We're smoking weed in a room, and they came up with the plan. They said, "Hey, we know this guy. He's a good kid from the suburbs. Look, he has $1,000 worth of weed, and since we know him and you don't, Adnan, and we'll set up a fake drug deal. Look, no guns, no knives, no weapons. I've never held a gun in my life, even till this day. I've never shot a gun or held a gun. So the plan was for me to, in a fake drug deal, because I didn't know him, take it from him and run into a car, and the driver would drive off. And so I didn't have a car, neither did he. So he called up one of his high school friends that I didn't know. Maybe I think I met him in passing once. And he called him up to be the getaway driver. And his job, from what I was told, was once Adnan runs to your car, just drive away. And so I agreed. I felt like, you know what, absolutely, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it for you. Do it for me, and whatnot, whatever my excuses were. And I thought at that time, okay, this is easy, just grab and run. So long story short, the young man comes down from a town not close by, far away, and once he's handing me the weed, my co-defendant, the guy who was supposed to be the getaway driver, I found out later he suffered from bipolar schizophrenia, wasn't taking his medication. He, for no reason, pretty much pulls out a knife, he stabs and kills a young man.
This was a crime that could have happened as planned, and you would have driven away, maybe gotten caught, but certainly not dealt with a homicide.
No, you know what's crazy? I thought about the worst that could happen, and the worst that could have happened, I thought was, you know what? Like, we're going to have $1,000 worth of weed. Because I did not think that a person that has $1,000 worth of weed would call police officers.
Right.
So that was where my mind was like, oh, this is so easy, like this person. And I know it was wrong. That was not who I was anyways, but like, I just felt like this the worst that can happen is we're going to come up with $1,000 worth of weed. And so thinking of someone dying, absolutely not. The plan was not to have any weapons. And maybe this guy did carry a weapon the whole time with him because he was schizophrenic. I don't know. But I will tell you, I got out of the car and I was yelling at him, like, cause it was the middle of the night, or it was 8 p.m. It was dark. And I was yelling like, hey, what are you doing? What the F are you doing? Get in the car. What are you doing? Because I thought they were fighting. It looked like they were fighting in the middle of the street.
And they weren't even fighting. He just...
Yeah, he was stabbing them, which I didn't know. The next morning, 2 a.m., I was arrested, and I was charged with robbery and murder. And this kind of segues into the legislation, but I was charged with robbery, murder, and I was told that because I was guilty of the robbery, I'm equally guilty of the murder, even though if I went to the extent to stop it. I ended up going to trial. I was facing the death penalty for 18 months. I spent from 18 to 22 in county jail, fighting my case back and forth in court. But when I went to trial, and I'm sharing this for context of what the law is, I was not on trial for a murder. My trial literally started with the district attorney saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are not here to prove that this man, Mr. Khan, committed a murder. Matter of fact, I will tell you right now, he is innocent of the murder. what your job and what the jury's job was, the 12 jurors, their job was to find me guilty of an intent to commit a robbery. That was their job. That's what the whole trial was for, which I was absolutely guilty of. I took responsibility immediately. I owned up to my part of the crime, and so I was guilty of that, and I still am guilty of an intent to commit a robbery. And so once the jury found me guilty of an intent to commit a robbery, their job was done. They went home, went to their families, and the next phase was the sentencing phase, which was with the judge alone. And with this law, the felony murder rule, the judge had to sentence me to 25 years to life.
That's the part that makes no sense to me. And I guess that's the part that made no sense to you, Alex. The 25 years to life for a robbery that did not involve a murder. That seems like a very long sentence.
Yeah, I mean, 25 years to life. I mean, and at the time when Adnan was sentenced, no one was getting paroled. So that means 25 years to life. When people say that, it means they have to do 25 years, and on their 25th year, they get to go in front of a parole board. But at the time, no one was getting paroled. Parole was just something that was completely fleeting. Even now, there's been a lot of reforms in California, and we still have an 84% parole denial rate. So, I mean, it's a huge triumph for the 16% of people who are coming home. But for the rest, I mean, it's still heartbreaking and difficult. So when Adnan was convicted and sentenced, he thought he was going to die in prison. And so I guess we meet, I think, 14 years into your sentence, or 13 years?
12.
12 years into his sentence. So with my work, I met a lot of people, juveniles and young people who were given who were sentenced to life. And there were a lot of reforms that were helping getting them out. But the one story that I would hear many, many times, and that I just made no sense, was this felony murder rule. And then meeting Adnan, he had a spirit of an activist, and I remember him telling me about his case, and I just thought it made no sense. So I remember we were talking about it, and he told me, well, the only way for me to get relief is for the law has to change. And I guess, me coming from a place of such privilege, I just thought, well, we'll change the law.
And both my parents are lawyers. I'll do it too.
Yeah, I can figure that. So that's kind of what started our quest on reforming the felony murder rule, which we eventually passed, and then Adnan was the first person out. So,
which means that as an accomplice to the crime, but someone who was not involved in the murder at all, you could be resentenced.
Resentenced to the underlying felony on all those illegal terms. But what that meant for me, the felony was a robbery. And so now if there was a kid or someone that was in my very position now, they would get the time for the robbery, and which could be, it varies. I think it's like some time in county jail, several months in county jail, 16 months, or maybe 3 years or 5 years, something like that. So eventually I was resentenced to 3 years. And when I was resentenced in January of this year, a few months ago, I had already served 16 years. And the judge resentenced me to 3 years.
So California owes you some years, you could say.
I don't know.
I think so, but Adnan would never say that.
I mean, because I know we're having a conversation about reform and inequality or whatever, but I definitely still, regardless of what the law says, I do take full responsibility for what I did. And I understand that there's a young man that it is not alive today, and his family's in grief and pain, and regardless of what I did or what I did not do, I hold myself accountable for that.
Adnan, have you met the family of this young man since? No.
The system is not set up to facilitate that. I also understand that both sides have to be ready for that meeting, whatever that means. But the system does not provide those opportunities to prepare, get ready, or really get ready just means find healing. But That's a different conversation. Yeah.
So, January 18th of this year, you suddenly are a free man.
Like literally, I didn't even know.
You didn't know it was even coming.
No.
You're a free man. You enter 2019. You were last free in what year?
2003.
2003. Facebook, Donald Trump. I mean, obviously you knew what was going on. You had a TV in your cell. You weren't, muffled. But it's like Rip Van Winkle. You went to sleep and then you get up and it's a different world.
Different world.
This is a strange question, I suppose, but you're probably maybe marveling in the world because you get to live in it again. But does it feel like spiritually a different place from the world you left in 2003?
There's definitely two ways to answer that for me. One is, you said spiritually. That's a key word that I live by, like in my life. And so, spiritually for me, where I'm at internally, it's a completely different, quote unquote, world that I live in out here, as opposed to 2003, the 18-year-old homeless, no high school diploma, weed addict, and what that meant internally, spiritually for me in the world out here. And then where I'm at today, I'm so much at peace. Maybe just maturity is probably just maturity, but definitely at peace. And so in that sense, like a lot more alert. And then there is part of like appreciation for the small things that I see, like I talked about this earlier. I spent so much time in prison that is built, architecturally is built to deprive. And so like I didn't realize that I was suffering from sensory deprivation. There were concrete walls everywhere I went for 16 years, and dirt and dust. And seeing green was not a common thing unless it was on TV. But you can't feel and smell and those other senses that come in with the visual when you're actually standing on like green grass is amazing. And that's including dog poop. Like seriously, I mean, even
no,
dog,
I
could appreciate that too,
Yeah.
But and then the second way I can answer that question is yes, the world has absolutely changed. When I went in, they didn't have cameras on phones yet. Like you said, no Facebook, Instagram, none of those things existed. Social media was not a term yet. The word social media didn't exist yet. And so though there was like AOL and Messenger and I still remember our music from Napster. That's what in trying to somehow record it on CDs. Those things were what the norm was, and now here I am, and everything's at the touch of your thumb. Like
right.
The whole world I can connect with anyone, and that's another thing. I was deprived of connection of people, the world, family, and they're like right here in this little rectangle, and it's amazing. It's I don't miss the old days. I don't. It's amazing the world that we live in. Also, what's changed is like the way the food has changed, and what I mean, like the movement around food, the whole organic, non-GMO, I don't, all that
farm
stuff.
To table, yeah.
When I went in,
food.
Healthy food. When I went in, like we literally the world thought of the food pyramid.
Yes.
And it was wrong. I heard it's wrong. Like
right.
The food chain or whatever. Like that's wrong. So I went in thinking like the whole. The system of food, this is what life is. I come out like, no, it's completely different. So the concept of like food has changed, and it's also annoying. I was in LA and I wanted some regular ass ice cream.
He thinks we've ruined ice cream.
The world that whatever this movement is has ruined ice cream. Everywhere I went, it was vegan ice cream or avocado gelato. I don't know.
Yeah.
I remembered, I just...
what happened to chocolate chip cookie dough?
I just appreciated his cynical wit. He's like, Alex, I do not want to have fennel lavender ice cream, okay?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you, man?
I'm sorry. Re-entry is so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. It really is. That's re-entry, like finding the correct ice cream.
Wow.
Yeah, and so like things have absolutely changed.
There are no more Polaroid cameras.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, we
sorry.
have them in our office.
I take that back. You have Polaroids?
Yes. It's like a hipster thing, it's like...
I know it's a hipster thing now. Like that's the thing. Like Polaroid cameras were the norm. Now they're hipster things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Another thing I just want to add is that's changed for me personally is my mom is the eldest of 8 children. By the way, just if people are wondering, my entire family and I are like very close now. Very, very close.
You've forgiven her.
I think yes. The answer is yes. That's where my healing is, like going back in my childhood, reflecting, doing a lot of introspective, grueling work, and going back to the root of my behavior patterns or the way I process neglect and abandonment. I had to go back and understand the 8-year-old me, and then forgive like my mom, what she was experiencing, forgive my dad, whatever he was experiencing, and then that provided a lot of healing for me. So that's, a lot of people are triggered today. Those triggers are not basically, those things are connected to experiences in our past.
Adnan, did your healing and reflecting and maturing and all these developmental things that have happened to make you the man you are now, a wholly different creature from Adnan Khan of 2003, were those facilitated by doctors, by therapists, social workers, any priests? Imams?
No, maybe on my own, yes. Imams that I would go, everything was voluntary, what I did, if it was provided in the prisons that I went to.
But was there a mentor who helped you through this and to make you healthier?
Not necessarily.
More moral person?
No, like maybe life and just a series of people that I feel like I was blessed to, that came to me, just learning and understanding. And honestly, I feel like there's a spiritual protectedness that I've had over the years. And I mean spiritual in the sense of like mentally, emotionally, I was protected and guided. I don't know how.
I have to interrupt you. There are, let's say 600 men at San Quentin State Prison. It's probably more, right?
4,000 altogether. 2,000 that general population.
2,000 male prisoners. And of those 2,000, 16% will be released because of this law that you helped pass. How many of them have grown as you have grown? How many of them can reflect, can grow, can forgive?
Tons.
Really?
I don't have a number, but a high majority.
So are you saying that even though the American penal system is not established to heal or to counsel or to rehabilitate, people do it on their own?
People do it on their own, and they do find groups of each other to do it. But I will say that there still are a lot of people who want help, like who want college, who want self-help groups, who want therapy, who need it and want it. It's just not there. But are there people like me? Absolutely. Anybody can sit in this chair and repeat the same thing, or if not better than I did. And that's I think the idea that these podcasts you mentioned earlier, they reinforce ideas of who incarcerated people are, because those things play on society's fears. Our laws are passed based on the fear that people have once they watch. People don't know incarcerated people for the most part.
Right.
They don't know. Like how many of your audience members have met someone formerly or currently incarcerated? I don't know. I don't know what those numbers would be. But so what do they know about incarcerated people, right? And then what is the source of their information? And so I'm sure, I'm just guessing, but I'm highly sure that the source of the information is media, is Hollywood, is different podcasts. And so like I'm sitting here telling you that there are people that I know because of proximity, because doing time, there are so many people, the stories are never told. The kindness, the generosity, the love, the care, the hardships that we have to overcome, which is hard. And that's on top of systemic abuse from officers and the culture of prisons in general, the violent culture in prisons. So like, are there people like me without any type of assistance, helps? Yes, there's tons of them, but there's also so many more that still need it, that don't have that provided for them.
How does you've been in New York now for about a week? Have you investigated what the similar aspects of New York prisons? There's some very famous ones here, Rikers Island, like Alcatraz, meant to send people away up the river to banish them. I think banishment is a big piece of what prison is about, to make the rest of the population feel safer. But what do you know about what's happening here?
In New York, there's a lot of great things going on in New York. I mean, one is the Bard University Prison Project, where they're bringing college into prisons in New York. I know that there's lots of great restorative justice work just going on in the city with Common Justice. I mean, very similar things, but again, we still have the lack of support.
Systemically, nothing is happening.
Systemically, nothing. It's all
what
grassroots.
is all happening is grassroots, is community-based outreach.
Yes.
I do know many writer friends who teach through the Bard program and who go to, I think it's Sing Sing, is closest to Bard College, and they teach creative writing. And I guess inmates get college credit for it because that's important too, to get your college degree. If you weren't doing restorative justice, if you weren't part of a nonprofit trying to help the population you just were able to leave, what would you be doing now? As a free man?
I mean,
do you think?
I think I would be trying to find a job somewhere. I think for me, I'm fortunate to have a lot of family members where I could, find a place to stay, which is the two major things when people come out. Housing and employment are the two hardest things to acquire.
Is there any kind of system there where, since we know that there's a big, fear of hiring the formerly incarcerated and letting them live amongst us, is there any kind of social working network that helps prisoners?
I think in California,
ex-prisoners.
So the thing with California is that there's generally they're having these transitional homes and what they call transitional or reentry homes that have become somewhat popular a little bit. But the issues with the way they're structured is so punitive. They just mimic prisons. And so, like, you'll have an ankle monitor on. Your parole officer will come by and says, "Get off your phone," and do things. There are rules that, if we're talking about rehabilitation and people reintegrating in society, those housing structures and the way the rules are made mimic prisons, which any violation can send you back to prison. And so, like, it is another form of systemic oppression that's happening. So though people are like, "Oh my gosh, there's tons of reentry support," no, it's not, because the way they're structured is structured so specifically, and they're administered through administrations.
And they're run by the most popular ones, at least in California, are run by Geo Group, which we all know what that is, like private prisons. They're the ones locking all the children up. So I mean, just not good people.
But the most successful ones, what we call not transitional but re-entry homes, have been the ones that the community is taking upon themselves. They're not tied to the government or corrections. They are the community that is providing housing and employment for people getting out. And
yet, you realize it takes a special person to have that generosity and have that faith that a person like that will be a helpful part of the community.
Well, I think that happens with just proximity to people. How many people, like I said, know incarcerated people? Like, know them. How many people know them?
Yeah.
None. So if you're talking about have trust and faith in the people coming out, it's still this big old, like, faceless figure. And I'm filling that faceless figure with my biases that I already have about, oh my gosh, this person did what? And it's not about our whole thing is, it's not what we did, it's who we are today. Like Alex talked about, were you the same person when you were 15? Like this, I went in at 18. I'm 34. Like 16 years later, I'm not an 18-year-old anymore. And so, like, what people are fearing is the 18-year-old me, not the 34-year-old non-con that's out. And that's the problem, that we don't have people knowing. Prisons are literally, they built a wall. They keep community out on purpose, because some people can argue it's a business or whatever you want to call it, but people need to meet people who are incarcerated. They have to. You have to. Proximity. And then make your judgment. And after meeting and actually getting to know somebody that's currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, and then you're like, you know what? I still have the same biases I have. After meeting this person, I'm going to stick to the way I used to think. That's totally fine. But you can at least say you've had that experience to go off of, rather than TV or media or podcast. Like, now you have actual substantial information to assess a correct, to have a correct assessment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's to me, meeting you has been eye-opening. Just
Thank you.
Understanding that you made this tremendous advance as a human being on your own during the worst set of circumstances, having normalized rejection and neglect and abandonment, and now coming out as a finer person who's going to help other people for a living. That makes me feel good. And if you're, as you say, like one in a million, one in of many who are like you, that makes me feel good too. And I think that for all the people who glamorize these criminals from Serial and all the other shows, I think it really bodes to look into what happens to these captivating, charismatic criminals after they've been
Not
deprived.
criminals. Can I say that? Because
Yes,
I think
tell me what word I
the-
should use.
Because the term criminal connotes like active, meaning that person is still a criminal. Me, like I at the age of 18, I committed a crime, but after that, I was not a criminal.
Right.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, so criminals. I mean, it's even language. We try to tackle mass incarceration, the ideas around it, even through popular vocabulary. So like we use the term people formerly incarcerated or people incarcerated, fathers incarcerated, artists incarcerated,
Okay.
writers incarcerated, because the terms inmate, offender, criminal, gang member, drug dealer, those things have quick biases. I mean, we know exactly what they mean in a matter of milliseconds once we say them.
Fair enough. So,
And that's not to you, that's for society.
yeah, no, I'm better than my society. Everybody knows that. But it does. It's just a fascinating subject. And the other thing I want to say is that Alex, who I used to think of as my protege, has grown to be so much bigger than that. You could have been a producer, an editor, or something like that, but you have changed your life. You were going to go to law school a few years ago. You work with lawmakers in Sacramento. You've had a huge impact all by yourself. Little petite Alex. I'm so
Thank you.
proud of you.
Thank you. That means a lot.
You're doing something that is really beyond community service, but it is community service because you're helping the world. And
Thank you.
I appreciate that and am very proud of you. And now you probably have a list of 5 things that improve your life.
We thought about a collective one
That
we could
is
both
fine.
agree on.
Okay.
'Cause I know that Adnan's on his own is different from mine, but this is kind of our office one.
Okay. And I want to
that's
say
so
that
funny.
for people who are interested in learning more about your work, they can go to restorejustice.org.
RestoreCal.org.
Sorry, say it again.
RestoreCal.org.
restorecal.org. And there will be much more media to come. Adnan is featured in Ear Hustle, which is, you mentioned it earlier, an interesting, wonderful, real podcast from inside the walls of San Quentin State Prison. And you'll be speaking on a documentary. I mean, they have not heard the last of you.
Nope, they haven't.
Not by a long shot.
By a long shot, hopefully. Yeah.
Okay, so let's have the list.
First of all, I want to say that this is genius. Like 5 things, right? Just the title and the idea of this show, and then having the 5 things that does it make your life easier
Or better.
or better?
Or, improve your life, yeah.
Like I thought of like in a funny, not a funny way, but like there's always I had my lame list,
Right?
right? And like number 1 thing was things that like God. Number 1 thing.
That's not lame. I mean,
And then like number 2 is family, and then number 3 would be ending world hunger. But not during. Let's not talk about it during dinner. Like that's
Yeah.
the only time I want to talk about ending world hunger is during dinner. Just stuff like that. Number 4, music. Number 5, podcasts. Things. But
you'd
then
be amazed how often family and music
come up.
up.
I'm sure.
Because they do make life better.
But we went deeper.
We went a little deeper. So our, if we want to just say what we came up with as a collective that we agreed on.
He took notes, so
I did
we'll
take-
go.
Okay, so the first thing was, first thing that makes our life better is cappuccino.
Yes.
It's so good.
It's so good.
Yes.
We love the designs on the cappuccino.
Yeah, foam art, latte art.
Foam
I don't know
art.
what it's called, but I look forward to the art.
Yeah, and how do you take your cappuccino?
With my hands.
Okay,
Yeah.
very fine.
We're whole milk.
Whole milk
yeah,
people?
we're whole milk people.
Yeah,
We
she takes it with whole milk. Well, I take it with the hand. But yeah, whole milk is something that, and this is all I learned through Alex. You know,
I think
like,
that just came from growing up in France. I just believe in dairy. I'm pro dairy.
Pro vache.
Yeah, pro vache. Yeah.
but you know, like
Vive la
just
vache.
Vive la vache.
for me to have the contrast on the cappuccino, I was so used to, for 16 years. I mean, freeze dried coffee, instant. You take a spoon, you put it in a cup, you put hot water in it, and it's dark, it's nasty, it's bitter, but it gets you up. You become super hyper vigilant in an environment you need to survive. And so now to just sit down, relax, not look over my shoulder, and drink coffee, cappuccino,
Luxuriate.
Yes,
And foam art.
And foam art.
And
like,
foam
oh,
art.
Come on. I mean,
What about some cinnamon on
Alex
top of
Alex
it?
is not a fan.
I'm not a fan of cinnamon.
But
I'm
I
okay
enjoyed
with
it the other day.
Or cocoa?
No, I'm a purist. I just want some foam art. But you know, I think Adnan is more adventurous with.
That's how the world has
toppings.
changed. When you say I'm a purist, I just want foam art on my coffee. Like, what is this world come to? I don't like this place. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so
Okay.
1, cappuccino. Number 2 is like pillows, like soft pillows and soft
We didn't know if
towels.
we could swear.
You can swear.
But
want, like, soft shit.
Soft shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like just soft shit. Like
Pillows,
Yeah.
Blankets.
puppies,
blankets,
Puppies.
goose down comforters, king size beds, couches.
Soft.
Like, freaking couches.
Something to embrace you.
Yes, to embrace me. Yes, I like the way you put
sweaters.
that.
Cozy sweaters.
Come on, V-necks.
V-necks.
Like
Who
soft
doesn't?
cashmere V-necks.
Oh.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
3 months ago, you were wearing polyester
Yes.
crap.
Yes.
And now
Soft
you're
shit.
craving soft shit.
Yes.
Okay.
That makes soft shit makes my not
Life
literally,
better.
Not literally, but though literally yes, but makes life better.
Yeah.
Um,
Cashmere was on my list earlier
Wow.
this
It's
year.
so good.
It's so
it is.
good.
I didn't know it existed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Welcome.
I'm glad I discovered.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
On behalf
you
of
so much.
Cashmere.
All right, so cappuccinos.
Yes.
1, 2, soft shit.
Right? Number
3,
three.
and this is, and I'm gonna explain this one. This is, you know how people mansplain?
Yes.
Men mansplain. So privilege
Yes.
splaining. Privilege splaining.
Oh, yeah.
That is one of my. I can't live without it because it gives me like this fire. And Alex too. Like it just like we sit here and so there was a lady about a few weeks ago. We're on a panel. It all directly impacted people, formerly incarcerated people, and the moderator is some person that is not directly impacted, but you know, read it in a book somewhere. And so we're telling her, she's like, no, the systems are changing. It's becoming so much more rehabilitative, and it's becoming this, and we are changing the system. I'm telling you, and I'm sitting here like I just got
And
out.
ankle monitors.
Ankle
are good.
monitors are great things, and I was like, no, and I try to be very respectful, and I was like, no, I think things aren't changing that much, and it's like, no, I'm telling you, things are changing to more rehabilitative and care and therapy and mental health and health services in prison. I was like, hey, I just got out like 40 days ago, like after doing 16 years, I could tell you. It's like, no, but I'm telling you.
Oh, so she was privileged. She
Yeah.
was privileged splaining.
Privilege explaining, but I can't live without it because it really helps me making sure that, you know, in a serious way, now I'm officially the co-executive director of our organization that we co-founded, and it really puts my leadership in check. You know, it really makes me think about the responsibilities I have and who I'm. Leadership only means that I'm in a more advantageous position to help other people, and so like my friends matter of fact, my friends from San Quentin were just calling me during this interview, and so like I'm constantly reminded of like proper and ethical and qualified leadership through that, and also I want to say there's nothing wrong with privilege. Privilege is a huge reason, one of the reasons that why the law passed and I'm out today. Just utilizing, and privilege just means an advantage.
Yes, and you know, and now thanks to my privilege and our privilege, we introduced him to cashmere, and he's grateful for that.
And I'm
exactly.
so grateful. And now
Look
I'm
at
privileged.
that.
Yeah.
And Cashmere's grateful to you.
Oh, I haven't heard that back yet, but as soon as I do.
No, that was I was authorized to speak for Cashmere. I got a memo.
Oh my gosh. The other thing we agreed on, this is more general. We said we wouldn't talk about generals, but we talked about comedy. It is super general. Like, sure, okay, we want to laugh, we want to feel good, but just the comedy as a tool, what it has done for me. One, no BS. As to survive in prison, I've actually got friendships and even officers at times, like through humor. And what humor did for me was break down these very, very, very intense barriers, defenses, that whatever you want to call it, these shields, in people that generally, when someone puts up a defense, then like, I don't know, it stops like us from like growing, getting to know, understanding even. And so comedy and humor as a tool and as a survival tool, where every night when I would lay down, when I had the TV, I would lay down, and instead of watching some show that had drama and action in it, I would just end my night with some 30-minute comedy show. And that's how I want to sleep pretty much every night.
That relaxes you.
It relaxes me. It makes me laugh. I mean, I wish I laughed more as a kid, and but I didn't. I was a lot more grief-stricken, and so comedy is definitely one of those things I can't, that has made my life and our life easier. When Alex would volunteer, I mean, we laughed so much when you would come in with the guys inside.
Yeah, I mean, we all like Seinfeld.
Yeah.
So you'd rehash.
We'd rehash, and also just joke.
Yeah,
I mean,
she would come in like, "What's the deal with incarcerated people?"
No, I mean, I think also just like life is so tragic, especially when you're dealing with incarceration and life and death. So you have to laugh, and laughter connects us, and it just relieves stress. So it's been a great tool.
I'm sure that's right. I'm sure even medically it helps.
Yeah, medically.
They always say laughter is the best medicine, and there was a book written by Norman Cousins many years ago about how the brain responds to laughter and how it does actually help heal and grow. Well, oxytocin happens when you're laughing, and all the good hormones start to work.
Live longer. It's funny you say that, because I had in San Quentin, I was part of the college program, and one of the classes I took was it was called literally it was called 204 research, but it was about, you do one research paper at the end of the semester. Your whole semester is you finding something out that you want to do and write a research paper about. And so, and by the way, it's 30-page paper that had to submit at the end of the semester, handwritten, because they don't have computers. There's no internet access inside. And so what I went with is laughter really the best medicine? Initially, that's what I started with. And so I was learning a lot. I mean, just the learning process in that was fun. I ended up changing it to how right now, especially this is in 2016, when Trump was elected. And my thesis ended up becoming, actually, I can't literally remember my thesis, but it was about how we're in a comedy renaissance and how comedy is changing today, in terms of how it's being used as a tool to fight back against the president. Like Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon and stand-up comedians are using their platform
for political.
Yes, and though that's always been around, but I had the statistics with like ratings and SNL. How SNL now in the West Coast, they show it at 8:30 while they show it here.
Is that right?
In the West Coast, and that happened in 2016 only because of Twitter. Because Twitter...
people were spoiling.
Yes, and then Trump would respond.
Right.
I mean, he just bombed Syria, but he's responding to Twitter because of Alec Baldwin's SNL skit.
That's true.
And so that in itself is funny, but... anyways, comedy. So that's how much it meant to me that I wanted to handwrite 30 pages around political.
No, I get it. Yeah. I get it. And you're a funny guy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'll recap. Cappuccino, soft shit. Privileged, explaining, comedy, and the last one we both agree to, but I'll use the I term, but we both agree, and it's a little more serious, but it's the idea that I can change things, and
on so many different levels.
Yes,
change oneself, change our situation, change the policy, change the world, and that helps make us wake up and do the impossible every day.
Yeah.
It motivates you.
Yeah.
And it saves your life, literally, figuratively.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is that like it's I think what I stick to on that saying is like the belief that I can. Many of us, like the way we grow up, and a lot of people don't even think about that they have the power to change anything, because they're literally born into the lottery of birth, right? Like they're literally born into the whole deck stacked against them. And so the thought that, for me to make it or change anything, I would have to be a rapper or dancer or singer or, an athlete. Those are my only ways out.
Yeah.
And that may be true, sure. I mean, if that's the talent you have, yeah, there's always an up and coming artist, right? But the truth is, like, you can change systems, you can change yourself, you can change your family. Like the way my family and I now, once where I was like the destructive one, the family, quote unquote, I'm the glue of the family today. Slowly my family is like finding healing with just sometimes my presence there. Friends and systems, like Alex said, like I believe that now. I believe that a few years back as well, but I really, believe in Alex. If Alex did not believe that she can change something, I would still be in prison. I have 9 more years to do before appearing before a parole board.
Yeah.
So literally the belief that, fuck, I can change things.
You know what? To all our listeners, if you've had a bad day, I recommend that you re-listen to this podcast and understand what gratitude is. And I want to thank you, Adnan. I want to thank you, Alex. I want to hug you both. Hold on to this podcast and keep it handy for those days that just feel hopeless. You've been listening to 5 Things That Make Life Better with your host, Lisa Birnbach. That's me. My guests this week have been Alex Mallick and Adnan Khan. You'll find a link to their website, restorecal.org, on my blog and at my website at lisabirnbach.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play Music, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Okay, until next time, stay cool, act natural. Bye-bye.
That was 5 Things with Lisa Birnbach. New episodes every Friday, if she remembers.